Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Beginner's Guide to Art Fundamentals series. This is a series of tutorials that I've been working on and off on for the last year or so. And I wanted to work on this series of tutorials because I feel like over the years of me developing as an artist, I've noticed there's a severe lack of a central hub where beginner artists or intermediate artists could go to get a refresher course or even just learn all of the basic fundamentals that make up art as a whole. Over the years, I found various books, various YouTubers, Gumroad tutorials. I have talked to other artists that are the top of their profession. And there's so much information out there that, it can be overwhelming to constantly be finding new things in different corners of the internet. So my goal is I'm going to try and bring a lot of that information and center it and create this focus so that when you need a refresher, or if you're a beginner artist and you're interested in getting into art as a career or just trying to develop your skill level as a hobby or whatever it might be, that you can go and watch these videos and you can follow along so that you don't forget to include any of these fundamentals in your own personal work. This series will be available on Gumroad, and there will be a total of 6 episodes, including this episode. In this episode, what I wanted to go over is I think that before jumping into understanding the fundamentals or even discussing the fundamentals of art, I think it's important just to make sure that everyone's on the same page when it comes to developing your artistic skill. Because this is one hell of a journey. It's such a hard thing to try and perfect this skill level or even just trying to improve at it on a daily basis. So what this episode is going to be based around is just talking to you about things that I've learned over the years through my experiences, through other people's experiences, and try to make sure that you're amped up, that you're ready to go and chase this development for your skills. So with that being said, let's learn a little bit about me. For some background info on me, I have been a full-time freelance artist for almost 3 years now and have been studying art for nearly 10 years. Since then, I've had the opportunity to work with many clients, including Magic the Gathering, Hi-Rez Studios, Fantasy Flight Games, Valve, and many others. I mean, I feel at this rate I've gathered enough information and experience to at least inform other people how they could get started on this themselves. I'm hoping to provide kind of a central hub that you can tell a brand new artist who's eager to learn, hey, if you want to take this seriously, just go watch these. If you're like many of the other potential future artists out there or wanting to do anything that could be labeled as a, quote unquote dream, chances are you've also given yourself an excuse or two as to why you shouldn't follow that dream. From all the live streams that I've done over the years, there's always someone who will come in every now and then that will say, hey, can I still become an artist if blah, blah, blah? Or even worse, you get the person that doesn't even ask and they'll say, yeah, I wanted to be an artist, but I couldn't afford to go to school for it. I've heard people make excuses before they even tried setting off on their path. When you want to do something that seems risky or scary, your brain does this really cool thing where it tells you that it's the worst thing to do and that you should feel really stupid for even trying it. I want to let you know that every excuse that you can think of is almost 100% bullshit. Like anything that you could think of right now, it's not a good excuse. And to prove that, here's a list of lame excuses in case you're listening to this and thinking, but, I'm different, like whatever. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you'll never be good enough. It's not true. If you put in the effort, chances are you'll improve. Like, it's a constant. You need to be born with the eye or be naturally artistic. I hear this one a lot from people that don't really have a drive to be artists, but it's usually from people on the outside. And it's not really true. Some people start with a bit more of a natural talent. Some people start from ground zero. But I've seen people from both ends go on to become full-time working artists. You're too old. That's a big one. I've heard that a lot. You're too young. No matter what your age is, you're never too old or too young to start on any of this. You need a college degree. I've never been asked for one. I don't know any artist that has been. You need to be self-taught. I've actually heard other people say this. This usually comes from the online art community because you hear so many people that didn't get a college degree or didn't go the college route say that no, college is terrible. You need to be self-taught if you want to get anywhere. And I don't think that that's true. I mean, I think you can go through mentorships. You can still go through schooling without being completely self-taught in order to get into this business. I think really it just comes down to your drive, the effort that you put into it, how much you're challenging yourself, and time, a lot of time. You need to do digital art. That's not true. You don't need to do digital art. You need to paint realism. Also not true. You need to paint. You don't actually need to be a painter in all this. You can be a draftsman. You can work completely in drawings. You can work in any medium that you prefer. You need a tablet with a screen like a Cintiq. I actually thought this for a while when I was starting out, and it was very frustrating having an Intuos. And I thought that I'd be stuck at a certain level because I had an Intuos. And now that I am older, I understand that I actually really prefer having an Intuos over a Cintiq, and I think it allows me to do things that a Cintiq wouldn't. You don't have any art friends, so you blame others for your lack of motivation. This one hits home for me. I was not raised around any other friends that were big into art, wanted to talk about art, do art, any of that kind of stuff. So I definitely blamed others and projected my own insecurities onto others because I didn't have anyone to really talk about this stuff to. You're colorblind. I know several colorblind artists. They're doing well. One works at DreamWorks. You can't make a good living off of art, so why bother? Also not true. I know plenty of artists that make very good livings, way fucking better livings than I'm making right now, that's for damn sure. If you've ever heard these or made one of these excuses yourself, I mean, just tell yourself to quit being dumb. Understand that almost everybody has had those exact same thoughts. The difference is that the people who became artists decided to keep going regardless of those excuses. So now that I've hopefully shut down any excuse that you might have had in your head, I'm going to talk about the stuff that usually creates those excuses in your head. Because yeah, it is possible for anyone to become an artist, but it's really stupid hard and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time, but it probably doesn't take as long as you might expect to become a full-time artist. When I was being brought up in the online art community, I was and I still am constantly a click away from looking at one of the greatest artists in the industry, which was incredibly intimidating, but I think that reminder of me not being as good as them was a healthy level of comparison that pushed me to be better. But you don't need to be the best in order to be making money. I personally remember going to my first couple of conventions and I would go and sell prints of my work that I wasn't actually getting paid by clients to make because clients weren't really willing to hire me for that level of work yet. So although I wasn't the best, people still enjoyed my work and they were willing to pay me for it, just not in a commercial sense. It was only 2 years out of high school that I was offered my first temporary in-house studio job at a local outsourcing studio. But it was another 2 years after that for me to finally make the move to full-time. If I'd applied myself and if I'd pushed my portfolio to companies more, asked other artists for any leads on jobs, etc., I could have become full-time 2 years sooner, but because I was constantly comparing myself to the greats, quote unquote, the greats, I never thought that I was good enough to take that leap. With all that being said, just because I could have done it in 4 years, that doesn't mean that you should look at that as a clear number to go by. I've seen some people work to become full-time and it take them 5 years, 6 years. I've seen some people saying that they've been working 10 years and still have not become full-time. But then there are the super beasts out there, the people that went from nothing to full-time in just 2 years. It's all about the time that you put into it, the effort you give your work, and the amount of failures that you force yourself to overcome. We'll talk about how to overcome those failures and where to put that effort later in the video though. I do want to take a second to discuss more traditional art education. What I mean by that is the classic go to high school, go to college, university, specific art school with big name, get good, blah, blah, blah. I was on Twitch the other day and I was just perusing the creative section and I came across a young streamer on there, but he was studying anatomy nonetheless. He was being asked by quite a few people in his chat for advice on art education. And I was pretty blown away, although I guess I shouldn't have been, to hear him immediately, almost like a tape recorder, state the same advice. Go to college, get a degree and proper education, and then get a job. Now, I never went to college, and I achieved the task of becoming full-time without it, so clearly you can see my own personal bias, but even I know it's not so black and white, and neither traditional art education nor self-taught are the right way to go. I believe there are some great art schools out there, but I also know for a fact there are some pretty shitty ones. I almost went to one of those, actually. Years after I chose to stay with my parents and study in their basement, I ended up working with an alumni from that same school who had nothing positive to say about it. From the artists that I've talked to that went to school for their education, almost all of them say they wish they didn't or went to a better one. Whether it's the mountain of debt you collect over time, or it's the lack of career-focused teaching that so many art schools give, not many people have great experiences at their particular school. I've even seen and talked to artists who took an entire 4 to 6 year education at a school, and then their portfolio was practically the same level if that when they began. And that's terrifying. However, there are good schools, people. Do not fret. I'll leave a list of schools that I've seen other artists vouch for on the screen. Unfortunately, and I'm sure many people already know this, most of these are in California. And I'm sure many of you that are watching this may even already be committed to an education. Halfway through your second or third year of schooling, you're too far in to go back right now. And that's all right. I don't want to give anyone a panic attack talking about this stuff. Like, just because you aren't going the hermit in the basement route and aren't in a highly recommended art school doesn't mean that you can't still improve. You'll probably have to work harder than most others, but you can still use your time to improve your skills and work towards becoming a working artist. Just remember that it all comes down to time, and it comes down to priorities. There are many artists I know who went to less than decent schools, but still worked hard in their off time and kept their priorities straight, and they're now working professionals. I know it might not be the most ideal advice to give, but maybe next time you're forced into some sort of a weird math class or woodworking class, even though you clearly are invested in painting, maybe, and this is a maybe, but like maybe just don't worry about getting the best grade in the class. I mean, I'm throwing it out there. It's in the ether. Mull it over. One thing that I feel doesn't get talked about enough in the industry is just the sheer amount of different positions that are available and the various niche communities that your art can attract. Not only are there many different positions when working in a company setting, whether it be a character designer, a creature designer, prop artist, environment design, UI design, illustration, etc., but there are also just endless communities that your art can appeal to. Let's say that like a company or in-house setting doesn't appeal to you, or even commercial work in general. There's so many ways that you can make a living off of your art without being shuffled into a specific position. Patreon, Kickstarter, conventions, YouTube, etc. As long as you have yourself and your art, and probably have a somewhat established personal style, there's an audience somewhere out there for you. You don't have to look at the biggest clients in the world and feel confined to just their styles. Like, don't feel like just because you enjoy painting realism that you have to work for Magic the Gathering or anything like that. And speaking of painting what you enjoy, this is a perfect segue into the next section. Style is the most ambiguous thing ever. If there's one question that I see more than any other, still to this day, even though there's so many talks about it, it's how do I find my style? And it's a weird question. Most people say the go-to, just be true to yourself and your style will eventually come through. I mean, which is true. I think if you just keep studying and painting things for yourself, over time, your style will come through. But sometimes people have multiple styles that they enjoy. I happen to be one of those people. I primarily paint in realism, but I really, really like to draw and paint in like a more exaggerated style as well. In fact, I also enjoy working on UI graphics, like icons and UI layouts and buttons and stuff. Something about the mixture of game design and art, it really gets my brain going in ways that I love. It's like a whole new problem to solve, besides just making the painting look good, you know? And you know, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the most important thing to really finding your style is figuring out why your brain likes to draw or paint. What is it that gets you excited to work on something? For me, it's the idea that I could make an impact on a project and how the consumers experience the game or book or whatever it is that I'm working on. The idea of a long project where it's up to me and a team of others to figure out the best possible way to let players visually experience a game is amazing to me. But for others, it's less about a project and having limitations and more about like the pure endless expression that you could only achieve with art. Complete opposites in theory, but still the same medium. There is one issue with the discussion of style though, and it comes back to the talk we had earlier about excuses. The excuse, it's not wrong, that's just my style. Nothing makes my eyes roll further back into my skull until I become permanently blind more than that sentence. On one hand, yes, I do believe that style can excuse some fundamental rules. Clearly, the proportions in games like World of Warcraft or League of Legends are ridiculously exaggerated, but they all stem from that base of fundamentals. They still have the correct forms in place that make the viewer not think twice about what they're seeing and accept the exaggerations for what they are. But if you are drawing an exaggerated human and their triceps that you've attempted to draw are down near the elbow, then that's not a style, that's just dumb. So quit using that excuse. If you've ever used this excuse, instead of shutting it down, whatever criticism you're receiving, try to really consider it. Take a step back from your work and think if it really is your style or if it's your comfort zone. And speaking of comfort zone, bloop, the comfort zone. If you haven't heard of it, I'll try to explain it the best I can with a personal story of mine. I began studying anatomy when I was 14 years old. I got a Bridgman anatomy book for a holiday or birthday or something. And I cherished that thing like nothing else. It was this masterful book in my eyes. It was my first step towards becoming an art god or whatever. So what did I do? I drew in it a lot. I mean, I would draw the Bridgman muscles over and over again. I had to have gone through that book at least 2 to 3 times. However, I did not read a single page. I only drew the examples. And to make matters worse, I rarely ever drew from my imagination or even just think, hey, this is how you draw the arm from this angle, but what if I tried drawing it from this angle? So no, it was the same repetition of drawing muscles over and over again from the book. So what happened, I got really good at drawing overly muscular men in the same poses that I drew from the book. I wasn't very good at a lot, but damn did I feel confident drawing a dude in a tight shirt at a 45-degree angle from the camera. And if they had a straightened out leg similar to that of a bodybuilder, I would kill it. But that was all I knew how to do. And it wasn't even that good, but in contrast to all of my other drawings that I would do that weren't muscly guys, they were amazing. So it quickly became my go-to, and therefore my comfort zone was made. The comfort zone is a weird thing. I truly think it can be the absolute death of progression if you do not challenge yourself and break out of your comfort zone. However, if you're staying true to yourself, chances are you enjoy your comfort zone for a reason. I think it's important, though, to know whether you are enjoying what you're drawing or painting because it's easy or because it's fun. If it's easy, don't stick around there, but if it's fun, that's what you should shoot for. I commonly don't use reference with my personal work. I've been told I should more by artists that do, and told that instead I should study and practice more by artists who don't. One thing you'll figure out soon enough is that there is no right way. There may be morally correct ways to draw or paint, but that scale of morality kind of lies on you. Personally, I don't like the idea of relying on reference in order to draw or paint something unless it's for a client who's paying me to do the best job possible in a limited amount of time. But that's just how I feel. But yes, that means the road to a strong portfolio will probably be a longer one for you if you feel the same way. However, I've also seen artists who rely too heavily on reference material be forced into a situation where they have to rely on their own personal knowledge, and because of that, their image falls really flat. Decide how you feel about this and what you personally feel comfortable with, whether you use 3D models or photos, reference material, or you're just hard-headed like I am and you choose to just study a lot. But figure out who you want to be and pursue that. Now, I'm sure some of you might be wondering what I mean by studying. I keep saying it, so I'm sure somebody who's new and listening to this is a little confused by me just saying study, study, study over and over again. Studying is another thing that took me way too long to figure out how to do. So I'll try and keep it simple and share my own studying techniques, but in order to know how to study, we have to learn what we are studying. I think when broken down, painting is made up of 5 major fundamentals that should be studied: anatomy, color and light, composition, perspective, and values. When each of these are used together cohesively, they make up a really strong image. But if even one of these falls flat, it can bring the quality of an image down drastically. So that's what the series is all about. Taking a look at each of these fundamentals closely and informing you about all the things I wish that I had learned sooner when I was starting out. In this episode, I'm going to take a very surface level approach to each individual fundamental, just going over the bare minimums of what makes up this fundamental. Each fundamental will have its own unique video though, where it'll be a huge deep dive into what makes up the basic foundations of each one. When I talk about anatomy, I'm talking about the study and practice of understanding the muscular and skeletal structures of an animal or a human. Whether you're painting an illustration with a man, woman, bird, cat, whatever, you should have an understanding of what is happening underneath the fur and the feathers and the clothing. So this fundamental alone is one of the toughest to master, in my opinion, and takes the longest to gain an understanding of. There's some amazing material out there, though, to help you learn anatomy. Stan Prokopenko has some great videos on his YouTube channel that have personally helped me and many other artists a ton and are absolutely free. As far as written material, the books that I've gone through and found the most helpful have been Andrew Loomis's Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, as well as his book Drawing the Head and Hands. There's also a George Bridgman book I mentioned earlier, Constructive Anatomy, as well as a wonderful book on exaggerated gesture drawing called Force by Michael D. Matesi. But my all-time favorite material that I've looked through more than any other has to be Michael Hampton's Figure Drawing, Design and Invention. That book does an excellent job simplifying complicated muscle groups and creating a manageable thought process and workflow for someone just starting to get into figure drawing. Like, seriously, I can't praise it enough. As far as non-human anatomy goes, I'm a bit more limited on my personal recommendations, but there is a great book by Ken Holtgren called The Art of Animal Drawing, Construction, Action Analysis, Caricature. And although I personally haven't looked into it too deeply, the book Animal Anatomy for Artists by Elliot Goldfinger looks like it may break down the construction of animal anatomy, similar to how Michael Hampton's anatomy book does for humans. When I mention color, I'm referring to, well, color. It's kind of as simple as that. The reason light is also brought up is because color can change depending on its interaction with lighting. So for color and light, there really isn't any other material I could recommend more than James Gurney's book, coincidentally titled Color and Light. It goes over every type of lighting you could ever think of. It breaks everything down to a science, and it does it all in a really manageable way. It's a great resource. Another book that I'll probably mention for a couple of these fundamentals, but happens to fit well with this one in particular, is Creative Illustration by Andrew Loomis. He goes over many different subjects in that book, but one of them is, of course, color. Composition is the idea of constructing your image to best attract the viewer's eye to the focal point, or move them through the image in a steady flow that is pleasing to the viewer. It's also used as a narrative device to help tell the story in your image. And it's kind of weird. I'd like to say that there are general rules to it, which there kind of is, but also not really. I'm going to do my best to explain, but I'll preface all this by just saying now that composition is essentially all a theory. It's something that can't quite be broken down to a science as easily as anatomy or lighting can be, but there are some general rules that most artists should follow so as not to make an unreadable mess out of their image. As far as resources to help learn composition go, I personally think the book Imaginative Realism by James Gurney is one of the best. He not only goes through how to construct an image to make it visually appealing, but how to use reference material and build off of your imagination at the same time. Another book that's great for composition is that same Andrew Loomis book I mentioned before, Creative Illustration. Perspective is the idea of capturing an object or scene in 3D space, whether that be a building, person, landscape, or even something as small as a teacup. Proper perspective will make whatever it is in your scene read correctly and ground whatever it is in your image in reality. It is, however, a commonly ignored fundamental among many artists that I've seen, including myself. Perspective is primarily used in environmental art, especially ones that focus heavily on architecture, but that doesn't mean that that's all perspective is good for. In fact, the day I finally decided to buckle down and dedicate a few weeks to practice perspective was one of the biggest boosts in my work I've ever seen. I'm not as well versed in resources to help learn perspective, but there is one book that I know will teach you just about everything you'll ever need to know about perspective, and that is Scott Robertson's How to Draw, Drawing and Sketching Objects and Environments from Your Imagination. That book is a wonderful resource that will teach you every trick you'd need to know when having to draw an object or a scene in perspective. Values are essentially what you see when all colors are removed. Most people just know it as grayscale, or black and white. And they're incredibly important. Arguably one of the most important fundamentals out of the bunch, in my opinion. Because what you'll quickly learn when you begin painting is that if your values are chaotic and unbalanced, the entire image becomes unreadable. And even your potentially godlike drawing skills won't really save you. As far as resources go, the one I'd suggest the most would be that previous James Gurney book, Color and Light. There are many examples discussing value relationships and how they're so important to the development of an image. All right, that's the fundamentals. So, see, when you break it down to only a few things to consider, painting masterful pieces of art doesn't seem so hard, or it seems harder. I don't know how your brain works. But you might still be asking yourself at this point, okay, that's great, but how do I study these things? And that is a wonderful question, random internet person. You can always go out, buy those resources I listed, and read the hell out of them while also copying the examples from the book. But hopefully you've learned the lesson I explained earlier, that it's not just about copying what you learned. Studying's purpose is to establish a rule set for yourself so that when you're presented with a problem, you have these various tools that you've learned to overcome that obstacle. So, for instance, you're working on an image and you see that something is not quite right. Well, you just have to think to yourself, okay, well, why would something be off in my image? You can check the drawing, see if any forms seem off or out of perspective. Maybe something's lopsided. For anyone who's a true beginner, I'll just tell you right now, flip your canvas horizontally in Photoshop. It's a lifesaver. So maybe the drawing isn't the issue. Well, maybe your values are off. So you do some Photoshop magic that I'll teach you how to do in the values tutorial. And no, the values are fine. So you can fall back on each fundamental until you find the problem. Studying trains your eyes to see those problems more clearly, or just stop those problems from occurring in the first place. So how the hell do you do it? Generally, when I'm attempting to learn something, it's for a purpose. If there's a rule number one, that would probably be it. Don't study without a purpose. However, that doesn't mean don't study until you have an idea of what to apply that knowledge to. It means find a way to apply that knowledge after you've copied an image, always. So for instance, let's say I'm starting an illustration of a person holding an amulet of some kind, similar to that of like an item card you'd see in Magic the Gathering. Chances are, if I wanted to do my best to learn as much as possible, I'd study the things that make up an image like that. So that'd be hands, metal, maybe the amulet has a unique gem in it that I could study. I'd pull up reference images and I'd copy them. I don't care too much about getting the image exactly right to the T when doing my personal studies. I care more about the elements that make whatever I'm studying look like what it looks like. That sounds weird. I'll give an example. Let's start with the hand in the image. Chances are my focus when studying something like that would be the anatomy and the forms or values. Color is great and all, but without good values and a really solid drawing, the image will probably almost always look off. So the exact way I would personally do this is I'd break this down into 2 study sessions. I usually tend to make my study sessions be about 30 to 60 minutes so as not to get too deep in the nitpickiness. And also, I always want to make sure that I stay on task while working on them. The first study would be the drawing of the hands. I'd pull up this wonderful website called Posemaniacs, or a collection of hand reference images from Senshi Stock on DeviantArt. And I would give myself about 30 to 60 minutes to draw hands, but every few hands I'll draw one from imagination in a completely different pose. If that hand looks gross, then I know I still have room to grow. Once I feel nice and warmed up with my hand drawings, I'll open up a single photo of a hand, probably in like a similar pose to the one I want to do in the illustration. That always helps. Similar lighting would be ideal too, but not necessary. While it's in grayscale mode, I'll paint it, and I'll be keeping in mind each value level that the hand consists of. We'll talk more about the value scale in the values video though, so don't worry about that. Once I'm done with that, I'll open up my illustration and I will apply my newfound knowledge. So now that I'm warmed up and have a better understanding of the subject matter, the image will turn out 1,000,000 times better than if I had just guessed it all. I then repeat this process for the rest of the image, the crystal, the amulet, scene, setting, etc. I do want to emphasize the concept of thinking critically though. I was perusing Twitch the other day again, and I came across a lovely streamer who was doing some anatomy studies, a different one. I always love seeing that kind of stuff being shown on Twitch because I feel like some people tend to shy away from the actual behind the scenes work of getting better, at least in like the mainstream portion of art. So I sat in and I watched them for a little while and I was just lurking. And yes, I think putting effort into drawing various anatomical poses from reference is great practice. And if you're starting out and just need to adjust to sitting down for hours on end and doing nothing but drawing, then absolutely do that. I'm not trying to knock the efforts of this person. Clearly the time and effort were put in. However, that critical thinking portion of their studying wasn't being fully tapped, and if I'm honest, it didn't seem like it was being tapped at all. At one point they were drawing a guy whose back was facing the camera, and they were struggling and they didn't understand the anatomy of the back, and it was clear. Now what I personally recommend the minute you are struggling with understanding something, anything, is you break that shit down. I will cover this more thoroughly in the anatomy portion of the tutorial series, but what I mean is clearly the streamer didn't understand the anatomy of the back, the muscle groups, where they started and ended, their functions, etc. But instead of then looking into back anatomy and really taking a thorough deep dive into understanding all of that, they said, yeah, if it were a girl's back, I'd draw it much better. I'm much better with girls. And that's when I took a deep pause and I breathed in and I said, boy, women and men have the same back anatomy. Now I understand what this person was getting at. They were more comfortable drawing women than men. I get that. It comes back to the comfort zone thing we discussed earlier. But all that sentence says to me is that they are better at copying women than they are at men. But really, they don't understand anything that's happening underneath. I'm not telling you all this to shit all over the streamer's efforts. I'm trying to express to you how much more you can improve if you just tweak your thinking ever so slightly when you are studying a subject matter. Yes, the time and effort you put into your drawings is incredibly important, but if you're not thinking enough, then you'll never fully grasp a particular fundamental. So, that's how you study. At least that's how I study. Now, all you have to do is do that every day for a couple years, and you might be good enough to maybe make the equivalent of part-time income. Yeah, it's that easy. But don't be discouraged. If you take longer than you'd like to get to the point where you can do all of this for a living, like I mentioned earlier, there are artists that practically killed themselves from working so hard and were able to be full-time after only 2 years. Others took 4 years. I took about 5 to 6. Everybody's journey is different. All right, let's wrap this video up. Oh, this is getting long. It's a lot longer than I thought. Let's have a little summary of what we talked about, though, just to refresh both of our memories. I gave my sales pitch for what the series of tutorials will be about and why you really don't need to buy them, but I will truly do my best to condense as much important information as possible on each fundamental and teach them in an easy to digest way. Whether you've been working towards being an artist for 2 days or 2 years, hopefully you can still get something out of it. We talked about common myths to getting into this industry and why they're all dumb and you should just go for it. Don't let your brain tell you otherwise. We discussed what it really took to become a full-time working artist and how it still is a lot of work, but you don't need to be the best of the best. We talk about how you can do literally whatever kind of art you enjoy, and there will always be an audience or company out there for you and your style. We discussed the potential dangers of the comfort zone. Just remember, pursue the fun stuff, not the easy stuff. We took a look at all the fundamentals that my biased brain thinks are the most important, so now you should know what each fundamental is exactly and where you could go after the series to learn more about them. I also discussed with you how I go about studying and improving that inner eye of yours to see those mistakes in your images and hopefully stop them in your tracks. And then finally, I wrote this dumb list. So thank you everyone who watched this video. Please, if you agree with the things that were discussed here today and know someone who is starting to get into the industry, send them a link here. I'd like to try and make it easier for anyone new so nobody gets lost at sea on this dumb, stupid voyage. Oh, and like and subscribe or whatever.